Hello and welcome back to Knack Kitchen, where today we're making a quiche. A sausage, mushroom, and spinach quiche to be precise, and in all honesty, a quiche is probably one of my favorite savory recipes, and it's perfect for any meal of the day, be it breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And without further ado, let's just dive into this video and see how we make it. So we're going to start by making the butter pie crust, and for that I have some plain flour in a bowl, to which we're going to go ahead and add a little bit of salt. I'm only using a quarter teaspoon because I'm using salted butter over here. If you're using unsalted butter, then you'll certainly want to add closer to a teaspoon of salt. Now we're just going to make this by hand, and all you're going to do is press the butter into the flour at first. So you can just press it individually, or you can just start squeezing the butter as well. And eventually you'll have a mixture which looks like breadcrumbs when all of your butter will be incorporated in the flour. And you'll know when it's done when you clump it together and it holds its shape. So as you can see over here, it's holding its shape. So now we're going to go ahead and add some water. And ideally you're supposed to use cold water, ice cold water to be precise, but I just use normal water and it seems to work for me. So you can use ice cold water, particularly in the summer when it might be tougher to work with the pastry. So I required about 3.5 tablespoons of water, but just go by what you think is right. You need to just come up with this dough. It will be a little sticky, but that's fine. One thing to be kept in mind is that you do not want to overwork the dough because that will just make your pastry tough. So at this point, we're going to transfer this to a piece of plastic wrap, and we're just going to cover it and refrigerate this for at least 30 minutes before we roll it out. Like I said, we don't need to knead this too much because the more you knead it, the tougher your pastry will be. Now, one thing which I like to do is that I like to roll the pastry out even when it's wrapped in the plastic wrap, because A, the dough will chill faster, and B, it'll just be easier to roll out later as well. So now we're going to start preparing our filling while the dough is in the fridge, and for that I have some oil in which I'm adding some garlic, and you can add as much or as little garlic as you like. And after sauteing it for about a minute to a minute and a half, we're going to go ahead and add some onions. And now we'll cook this for about another 3 to 4 minutes until the onions turn translucent, at which point we're going to go ahead and add our mushrooms. Now the mushrooms are going to cook for about another 3 to 4 minutes until they start releasing some of the water, and they are, well, almost cooked, I'd say. And at that point, we're going to go ahead and add our spinach. And with the spinach, we're just going to cook this until it's all wilted down, and should take about 3 to 4 minutes as well. So once the spinach has wilted down almost completely, we're going to go ahead and add some seasonings and flavors. You can use whichever herbs you like. I'm using some Italian seasoning and some chili flakes. Now, an Italian seasoning sounds ambiguous, so you can use herbs like oregano. I personally like to use some rosemary and, of course, some thyme, whichever herbs you prefer. And you're going to season it with a little bit of salt, and as you can see, there's a lot of water over here. So we're going to turn off the stove right about now, and we're going to strain this. So I'm just going to pass this through a strainer, and I'm going to let this sit for about 10 minutes until all of the water has been drained out. And now that it's been about 30 minutes, we're going to take out our pastry from the fridge, and we're going to unwrap it and roll this out to the size of our pan. Now when you're rolling out a pastry which is particularly made completely of butter, you need to ensure that you flour the work surface, the rolling pin, and the dough as well. Because a butter pastry can get particularly difficult to work with, mostly because the butter will start to melt at a certain point. So make sure that you're careful. You keep moving the dough around as well. That will help ensure that your dough does not stick. And it's a little easier during winter time, so just know that it'll be even tougher in the summer, so you need to be very quick. And once you've rolled it out to the desired size, we are going to transfer this to our tart pan, and for that I'm just rolling this on my rolling pin itself. It just becomes a lot easier. That being said, in case your pastry breaks when you're transferring it to the tart pan, that's no reason to worry. You can just patch it up and that will still be perfect. Just ensure that you seal off your pastry completely and there are no gaps in the pastry whatsoever. Because if there are, then your filling will start to leak out and that'll just be a disaster. As for the sides, I've used a rolling pin just to remove all of the excess pastry. And now, just before this goes into the oven for blind baking, I am just placing a piece of parchment paper and I'm using some baking beans. And you can use rice, kidney beans, any kind of beans that you find. I'm using chickpeas and they work perfectly. Just ensure that they reach the edges because that's where the pastry tends to rise. So once it's blind baked for about 10 minutes, we're just going to remove the beans and the parchment paper and we are going to prick the base with a fork. And now this goes back in the oven for another 7 minutes. The details will be in the description box below, and now we move on to the filling or the custard part of the filling, and for that I have some eggs and some cream. And I'm just going to whisk this together. You can use a whisk, you can use a fork, anything works at this point. And once you've just combined it nicely, we're using some pepper. And with the pepper, again, we're going to use some seasonings and flavorings, whatever you choose. I'm using some oregano here and a little bit of salt. And after that, I'm adding a little bit of the spinach mixture, not the entire mixture, but just a little bit so that the custard has a little bit of the flavor as well. And now for the final assembly, I have the blind baked crust and I'm going to just line the base with some cheese, and I'm using 3 types of cheese. I'm using some processed cheese, some Parmesan cheese and a little bit of mozzarella cheese as well. In my opinion, cheddar cheese goes best with a quiche, but I just didn't have it. You can use whatever cheese you have. Even if you just have processed cheese, that's totally fine. We're just going to line the base and then we're going to cover it with our spinach and mushroom mixture, and we're going to just spread it out as evenly as we can. And then I'm adding some sausages which I've just chopped up and I've not really cooked them. They're going to cook with the filling in the oven. And now we're just adding the egg mixture and we're going to coax it to the edges just to ensure that it's distributed evenly. And the final thing that we'll do is just garnish it with some more cheese. You can totally reduce the amount if you're concerned about the calories. And another thing which you can do is you can actually replace the cream with some milk if you choose to. And now, another 35 minutes later, our spinach, sausage and mushroom quiche is ready. But you need to give it about 15 minutes before you can remove it from your pan. And there you have one of the most amazing quiches that you're ever going to make. And it's so easy, so delicious, it's very satisfying, not only to your stomach but also just the feeling that you get once you make something which is so amazing. And now I'm just going to slice into this to show you how perfectly the filling is set and how the pastry is cooked so perfectly as well. It's wonderfully flaky but not very crumbly, and it's just all around perfect and you just have to try it to believe it. With that being said, I hope you give this recipe a try, and if you like this video then please do give a like, share and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And as always, thank you so much for watching and I'm gonna see you next week.